Guys, we're not here to waste your time. We're going to be very brief and we're going to be very efficient. And we're just going to highlight the changes so that the people in the room can understand what we're proposing and so you can understand. And then we will proceed from there. So, Quinton's on your band. Quintonzonderver. So, as you may recall, we presented a framework for how to get to net zero, which we call reduce, produce, and purchase. And reduce means to make your building as energy efficient as you can. Produce means to produce as much renewable energy on site at the building as you can. And then purchase means to purchase renewable energy off the grid to make up for the difference. So what we did, as Mike mentioned, we changed the standard from maximize to strives to maximize, and that's true in all three cases, so we won't go over that every time. And then we introduced specific indicators taken from the LEED standard, which you're all already familiar with, to be able to measure the actual efficiency improvements to the building design. And then we also removed the ASHRAE reference because that raised some concerns about legal applicability. In the produce section, we added specific indicators, including installing solar photovoltaic or other renewable energy installations on the majority of the unencumbered roof space. And then we also specify installation of ground source heat pumps or a report on why that's not applicable in that particular project. And then finally, on the purchase component, we clarified what we mean by renewable energy, and specifically the issue of renewable energy certificates, which is very contentious and confusing, and so we gave some specific examples of what kind of renewable energy certificates would be acceptable, and also to state a preference for local renewable energy that is sourced in New England itself. And as a specific example, we just wanted to put this in there from the Massachusetts Energy Consumer Alliance, which provides New England Wind and New England Green Start products, which are renewable energy products that are available to consumers in Massachusetts at very affordable rates. The New England Wind is 4 cents per kilowatt hour above the N-Star basic rate. And the Green Start is 2.7 cents above the N-Star Green rate. So again, we just wanted to show this as an example of local renewable energy that is available for purchase on the grid today. So that's the conclusion of our presentation, and thank you very much for your attention.
Who would like to speak? Is there sign up sheet? Susan Ringler.
Good evening. My name is Susan Ringler, SUSANRINGLER. I live at 604 Green Street. I'm just here to voice my support for the net zero, and I also want to stress the urgency of the climate situation and how I understand that it's important to study things. It's also important to act because there are some very, very large buildings soon to be in the pipeline in Cambridge, and those buildings will be around for 50 or 75 years, and we really need to be building for the future and not the past. So it's really important that we start very quickly here in Cambridge to build buildings in a way that is sustainable, and that we not wait too long to think about doing that, but that we take a few important steps now. And I think the Connolly petition is taking a few important steps, and I encourage you to take many other steps later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. John Pitkin.
John Pitkin, 18 Fayette Street. I will be brief. I support the net zero petition, and just for the board's sake, I'd like to ask everybody who's here supporting it to show their support by standing or showing the cards. There is tremendous public enthusiasm for taking action on this measure. You understand that. Just thought it was important to see who's here tonight. Maybe it'll speed things up later down the line. Everybody doesn't have to get up to speed. I want to commend Mr. Mike Connolly for taking the Net Zero Committee's recommendations and putting them into zoning language. A lot of thought has gone into it. And I want to address what Chairman Russell said at the beginning. As he will recall, and as one of the members will recall, there was an earlier petition known as the Pitkin petition. It was also very comprehensive and wound up getting referred to a task force, as we were talking about tonight. But I will also remind you that parts of that petition passed initially. And I would urge the board not to consider this an all or nothing proposition and to consider the importance of expressing some opinions about what's in here and what seems to be more, well, it's not necessarily an indivisible whole. And any advice any opinions that the board can give to guide the city council and the task forces that will be formed will be extremely valuable. So please pay attention to I ask you to please pay attention not just to the general issues, but the specific proposals, and do voice an opinion on that, even if perhaps it's not pass or don't pass. So with that, I would say we need your input as soon as possible. The UN Climate Panel has confirmed what we said in our presentation 2 months ago. There is a carbon budget, and we have to do something about it real quick. Thank you very much.
Okay, Steve Husband. Jean Cimarran.
Hi, my name is Jean Cimarran. I live at 1 Richdale Avenue. And in light of the statements earlier on the scope of all of this, I just want to keep it very brief and say that I support the petition and to whatever extent we have procedural concerns, to also just echo the sentiment of please do voice those and voice any opinions you have on the underlying substance of this petition so that we can move forward with something that is appropriate in every respect to achieve the greatest amount of action on this as possible as soon as possible. Thank you.
Could you please spell your name for me?
Oh, sorry. Jeannne Sem. Sorry, that's the last name. Last name is Semivkan. Sorry.
Kristen. Hello. All right, can't really hear you.
Hi, good evening. I'm Kristen Von Hoffman. I live at 205 Walden Street. I'm just here tonight to voice full support for the petition. I've worked on various sustainability projects, green building design, and even the net zero building that's going up for the school department. But I'm here with my resident cap on tonight, and I'm just saying that I do fully support the Connolly petition. I think that Cambridge is a city that can be a full-fledged leader for this kind of new development and this kind of innovation. Thanks.
Thank you. Frank Giratano.
I am Frank Giratano. I live at 632 Mass Ave. I'll spell the name for you. Gerratana. I was one of the original signers of the petition, and I think that the Connolly team has done a really great job of addressing all the concerns raised by the city administration to make sure that the petition is workable and it will do a lot for the city of Cambridge in the future. And also I think that Cambridge has always been a leader in environmental issues. I think that where Cambridge goes, others is followed. I think that if anything is to happen with net zero, on a larger scale, it has to start in a place like Cambridge. And so I really encourage the board to do whatever it can to help move this through. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Matthew Schreiner.
Matthew Schreiner, Schreiner. wasn't sure if this forum allowed for me to ask a question of the board or whether I can only speak.
You can speak, and if there's a question in your speech, that's fine. You can't expect to necessarily get an answer.
I heard that one of the objections, I think, within the city council was the question of competitive pressures from other towns. And I wasn't sure if this board was charged with considering that as an issue. My feeling is we have lots of office buildings. I don't feel too much fear about that. But if I could hear what the board's recommendation on that could be or maybe cannot be, I'd be interested in hearing.
Thank you. Ellie, you are then.
My name is Ellie Yarden. I live at 143 Pleasant Street. I deeply regret the failure of the city to provide adequate common public spaces where differences can be resolved in a rational way. I don't think it's the obligation of the planning board to provide it, but nevertheless, I will address some of the objections which have been made to putting in Plan Zero. One set of objections, more ridiculous objections, is that there are better ways of doing things. I have studied the documents on this, which refer in one case to a combined academic, civic project, and so forth. There is nothing in this project that prevents other actions from taking place. There are many other actions needed. This one has a distinctive feature, and that is that it demands from all developers, and especially from the planning board, that it start looking at full cost accounting or full environmental cost accounting. This is not being done. I don't know that the Community Development Department is equipped for it. I do not know that this planning board has the people on it who have the kind of knowledge that is required to deal with climate change, its ecological consequences, and its consequences to the urban environment. Let that be as it may. I am sure that there are other ways of choosing planning boards, even under Plan E. I suggest that this planning board start doing research.
Thank you. Then Dignatelli.
Ben Dignatelli, N-A-T-E-L-L-I. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate public service. I'm a family of public servants. For justice with my family, I got to push back and challenge and say, we need more. We need to act a lot faster. And the irony in Cambridge is so strong to me. We invite all these big drug companies in on these big buildings to make quality of life way better. But every building that we build these days makes us less healthy. I mean, it's just a fact. And I think it'll help the economy, it'll help the tax rolls here in Cambridge, it'll help the economy in Massachusetts. And yeah, this petition might not be ready right now, but I've been hopping on webinars with the New Building Institute for years now, and they're a good resource to learn more. And it would be great if they were on board with this petition too. The New Buildings Institute could offer a lot. And but if we wait until everybody's on board with this, it's not change. It's just business as usual. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Carolyn Shipley.
Carolyn Shipley, 15 Laurel Street. Excuse me, SSHIP, as in Peter, L-E-Y. Laurel, L-A-U-R-E-L, Cambridge Park. Go to Cambridge Park. I I want to mention a very interesting report I came across today. And it says, ask the climate question. It's from the Center for Clean Air Policy. Actually, someone can tell you that there will be this forum at MIT where people from Center for Clean Air, actually Steve Winkleman will be in. He's from the Center for Clean Air Policy. They ask urban leaders to ask the climate question. I think that's what we're here for. They want to know who is going to be the champion of adaptation. It could be a mayor, a county commissioner, a city department or planning board, or someone like Mike Connolly, who took the initiative to create the Connolly Net Zero petition. He's a real adaptation champion. The UN just released its report last week saying that we will pass the tipping point within a decade or two, and has set guidelines for all countries to do something about their emissions. Yes, there are some countries that have more carbon emissions than we do, but someone has to start it, and we have to start somewhere. I was thinking that if I were running for city council, I would have a campaign slogan which would be 3D. Considering the fact that parts of Cambridge will be flooded according to a CDD report by 2050 from the storm surge, my 3Ds would be that I would ask the city to build dams, dikes, and docks for our boats, because we won't be using our cars. I urge you to be the adaptation champions, to do something about starting us on the way to saving our environment. We're not making it up. All scientists, there's another report I think in the Globe today about another report by the Union of Concerned Scientists. Most scientists say we do have a problem. So I urge you to be the climate adaptation champions. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak? Okay, again, the blue shirt behind the man in the blue shirt.
Parag Shah, so P-A-R-A-G. Last name is S-H-A-H, and I apologize, I'm not actually a resident of Cambridge. I used to be a resident of Cambridge, and echoing comments made earlier, I now live in Boston, and I would tell you that other communities are watching. I think this is a potential leadership position that Cambridge can take on this issue. It's something bold, a little different, and I think the steps are lined up to be taken. So I just wanted to play that out there, that I think Boston's looking. There's a new mayor coming on board. I know at least I've mentioned it or whispered it into the ears of one of the remaining two mayoral candidates. So, we're hoping to piggyback on what Cambridge leadership does here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Mark Jake with J-A-Q-U-I-T-H. I reside at 213 Early Street. Chairman Russell just told us that the board recognizes this issue, knows where we need to go. Everybody out here recognizes the issue, knows where we need to go. I just urge you to use your office to help us get there. Thank you.
I guess I would make a correction. I think we don't know, specifically don't know where we need to go. We know the end goal. We don't know how to get there. And that's...
Can you speak up?
I can try. Get closer. Okay, anyone in the city next to you wish to speak? Is that correct?
Yeah, I'd like to
There's a woman who's there. Is that Pebble?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, Neville, you go first, and then I'll go.
I'm afraid so.
My name's Pebble Gifford, and I live at 15 Hidyat Street. And I look at this issue as a matter of pride. And I am very proud that Cambridge has taken a leadership position in this, and I hope it continues to. I was curious tonight to see how many times I could find on Google Cambridge net zero emission highlighted or identified. 3 pages when I ran out. We're on many news sites. Politico had something on it. There were a whole bunch of them. So we've already gotten recognition for not doing anything. and we've also done some knocks because the word was out that the politicians and special interests are trying to kill it. That's in the news too. So I urge everybody just to take a look and see how much coverage this issue's getting already. Now we can be proud of that, which I am. And once again, Cambridge can take the aggressive position and try and get this thing going and established. And I would hope that the city councilors can take pride in it and not knock it. And the planning board, the same thing. We can work it out. I think there's a will to do it, and as Hugh's pointing out, the way is the issue. And I'm very disappointed in, and I'll mention this, is we're the perfect city to do this with the People's Republic, we can do things on the radical side, and get away with it, I guess. What I am not happy about is MIT's role in this venture. I understand that they have designed and created some of the systems that will be put into these buildings to enable them to be net zero emissions. But yet, they're taking the opposite tack. They have a task force that exists to kill this program, to kill it. And I think that's so irresponsible. Here's one of the leading scientific educational institutions in the country. They should be getting blasted doing this. And they're much more concerned now. I think they had a major change in course. They're less focused as far as their endowment or funds are concerned on students and student housing and student issues. They formed these task forces, these groups that are interested in commercial development, the incubators or the innovators or the whatever it is you want. And I even heard a rumor, maybe it isn't a rumor, maybe it's the truth, that they want Central Square to have buildings that can be bedrooms for people that are going to come and work in these conventions. They're already here, a lot of them. If that's their attitude toward Central Square, I suggest that they should move out, move on, do anything. We shouldn't let them get away with taking that position. That is the case. So that, once again, I'll just say that I think this is a matter that, as Caroline said, be proud of. There should be some heroes in this. There already is one hero who's gotten us this far. And I think there's a chance here for the planning board to be heroes and some council to be heroes. The way you see, there won't be 3 pages of Google notices about Cambridge in this petition. There'll be 10 pages. And I think that's something we should shoot for. So let's go with it. A lot of questions, but get them answered, and let's go with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Sue Butler. I live half a block from here. I own 2 buildings that are increasingly on geothermal and photovoltaics and carbon negative. My household electric bill is 0 for the year, and it covers my whole household use and all the pumping for the baseboard hot water systems in my tenants' apartments. I think you should support this excellent petition. Mike Connolly, thank you very much. It's very important that we take a position now in order to solve the problem. The problem is that there are 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide and many other greenhouse gases in our upper atmosphere, including water vapor, which gets there from the increasingly violent storms that go 5 miles high and throw water vapor into the upper atmosphere, along with a number of other compounds. It means we're heating up. It means we are in the beginning wobble of a catastrophe. I work as a nurse, also as co-principal investigator in the lab for probabilistic reasoning, where we study errors of judgment under uncertain conditions. When I first started as a nurse, I worked in intensive care. I took care of people who were very, very, very catastrophically ill. I know what you have to do to save someone who's got a bad lab value. I worked for a year in surgical oncology on a cancer ward. Occasionally, a patient did not survive. I took care of their family, but I've witnessed failures of complex systems. 400 parts per million carbon dioxide in our atmosphere is a lethal dose of carbon dioxide to our planet. You can stand and take a position and make this net zero happen, and you might make a difference. A lot of us are trying not to think 3 words. It's too late. I don't know if it is or not. Last fall, I submitted an article to a peer-reviewed engineering journal on my efforts and my thoughts on sustainability and what is required. I did not expect it to be accepted. I'm not an engineer. It was accepted. I talked to my boss in the lab. They were going to let us know by May or April, and mid-May I hadn't heard, and I called my boss up. I said, they haven't rejected it. Shocking. He said, not only have they not rejected it, they were very, very impressed. I'll read you a little bit from the first page and a little bit from the last page. Ray Nickerson wrote in 2003, that's 10 years ago, delays in dealing with environmental problems will ensure both amplification in the magnitude of effects and their extension in time. Beyond some point of deterioration or depletion, full recovery may not be possible. As difficult as preventing or slowing some types of environmental changes may be, reversing them after they have occurred will be much more difficult, and in some instances, perhaps not possible at all. That's what we're facing. I put one sentence in there. I was sure they were going to cut it out. And in the editor's comments, appended to the reviewer's comments, he said, don't cut it out and add to it. I wrote this a year ago, maybe more. My phrase was 2 words, 100% now. And the editor added to that, must be the new standard for all buildings, homes, business, industry, and government buildings. You could take a first tiny step now that might help a few other people make commitments to make the changes that we need to make to try to reverse, not avert, we're in the thick of it, to try to reverse a catastrophe, and I hope we will. I'm sending you copies.
Thank you.
Some copies for you.
Yes, a woman in the suit.
I'm Audrey Schulman, 21 Acorn Street, SCHULMAN. I have 2 kids, as many of you might have kids or grandkids. Every day I make sure they try to eat appropriately, have a little milk, maybe have a vegetable or 2. I make sure they do their homework. I hope they go to college someday. I hope they have a full and happy life. I do all these things in hopes that they will have that full and happy life. Climate change is something that can change that. There is a great Nobel Prize winner, whose name I can't remember now, who said that the way that you judge a society is by how it hands down, what sort of society it hands down to the next generation. And I think we will be judged. The only thing we can do, the most loving thing we can do for the next generation is to give them an intact planet. And you guys have a really small chance to do one teeny thing to help out. I really recommend you do it. Thank you.
My name is John Massey, M-A-S-S-I-E. I live in Porter Square on Hancock Street, right on the border between Cambridge and Somerville. I have the great fortune of actually working in the energy efficiency field on the residential side of things. And what I do every single day is I talk to residents of Cambridge as working in an outreach capacity about energy efficiency and about the environment, about climate change. And the amazing thing that I've seen in the last year and a half is how many hundreds, if not thousands, of residents are jazzed up about wanting to do something about climate change, whether it's insulating their home or installing solar panels or heating systems, whatever it is. Just getting an energy assessment, just screwing in CFL light bulbs. People want to do this. They want to make a difference. So the point that I would like to make here is that I think Cambridge residents are ready for this. I see it every single day. It gets me excited for what I do. And I would really encourage you to give back to those residents that are really fighting this fight by passing this petition. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Spencer Lawrence, SPENCER-LAWRENCE. I also live on the border of Cambridge and Somerville in Porter Square. Happen to know that guy. And I want to thank you guys for your time and thank all of you for showing up for this important discussion. I work in the energy efficiency industry, and day after day, I see firsthand examples of how utilizing energy efficiency and renewable energy in buildings is in the long-term economic interest of the building. It also creates jobs. It's helped create a job for me, for my roommate who just spoke, and for lots of other people. But beyond the economics, this is really an ecological imperative that this happens. And to address one tiny subset of the ecological importance of this, I'm going to take a quick poll of the audience. Who here likes or has ever been to a national park? Raise your hand. Great. Did you have a good time?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Well, today is the 123rd anniversary of the Yosemite National Park, which is a beautiful national park that I've had the good fortune to go to. And I wanted to share a quote with you today from Jonathan Jarvis, who is the director of the National Park Service. In 2010, Jonathan Jarvis said, quote, "I believe climate change is fundamentally the greatest threat to the integrity of our national parks that we have ever experienced." So I just want to leave you with that and implore you to act quickly in support of this important measure.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and good evening. Sam Seidel, S-E-I-D-E-L, 381 Broadway. Excuse me, I just want to express my continued support for the petition. I know there's a lot of work to happen, and I think the task force is a good way to start that work. It's going to allow us to broaden the picture, because not only is this a complex ecological problem and perhaps a design engineering problem, but it's a very complicated human problem and political problem given all the forces in play here. So I would just urge you and all the other powers that be that are in this room that you have sufficient representation on that board, because you will ultimately have the difficult work of interpreting what that ordinance means. or whatever comes out of that whole process. And so just make sure there are enough sets of ears there to remember what was said and why it was said that way. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Monica Raymond, R-A-Y-M-O-N-D, 57 Brookline Street. Isn't Cambridge wonderful? So many learned references. I didn't actually come out today intending to speak, but as I'm listening, I had three thoughts. The first one is that some things are thinkable until they become unthinkable. For example, slavery was considered okay. Right? Smoking inside a room was considered okay in my lifetime. It's pretty hard for me to understand actually how, knowing what we know about anthropogenic climate change, it's considered okay to still build buildings that have closed windows and rely on fossil fuel for their ventilation systems. This is called traditional architecture. It's not traditional architecture. It's very short-lived. It's just the last 100 years. There's all kinds of things we know about architecture and city planning that we don't do anymore because of this. And this is something that is just going to seem insane. And to me, it already does seem insane. So to me, the net zero petition feels like it should be a fait accompli because what we're doing right now is crazy. So it has to stop. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that developers, architects, unions, they're going to rise to the moment. Someone just sent me an article last week about an electricians union in San Diego that's collaborating with the union is collaborating with net zero development there. The electricians are learning the system. So why would we turn down the opportunity to be a place, and it's not like we're going to be pioneers for the world. This has already been pioneered in Germany and the Netherlands, but in the United States, no. Why would we turn down the opportunity to be the place where we're learning how to do these things, where our builders and our unions are learning the skills that they need to really build for the 21st century in a rational way? And the third thing is, why would we walk away from basically the nachas, the good feeling, the possibility of pride and praise that we would get for being a city that pioneers this in the United States? It just seems to me like a no-brainer to figure out a way to go forward with it, and I hope you will. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir, behind you.
My name is Stephen Miller, M-I-L-L. You never know, but there's a lot of them. I also didn't expect to speak here today. I think one of the common worries about an ordinance of this type is that it will put us at an economic disadvantage. They'll go to Somerville. The good news, I think, is that what makes Cambridge special and unique is not moving. We're in an incredible, lucky situation that the things that give us the economic advantage are stuck here. They're trying. I mean, Harvard's trying to move to Boston, but it's not there yet. And it probably won't ever be fully there, and neither will MIT. I think we have the chance to take advantage, not to kill the goose that's laying the golden eggs, but in fact to take advantage of our advantages. If you can't take advantage of your advantages, you're really in trouble, because when you're in trouble, then you can't do anything at all. This is the time to move, when things are going well. And in fact, I think a bigger threat is something that I, as a person whose house is 5 feet above sea level, and whose basement, when I dig down, actually has sand. I think we're more threatened by the rising tide of storm surges than we are by making a small percentage increase in the cost of initial construction, which by every experience over the long haul, more than pays itself back in lower operating costs for the long term. I think the threat for us, economically, competitively, is not taking action to make our local environment and our world safer. If you really want things to move, if the climate keeps happening, they're going to go to Vermont, not to Somerville. And I think we are in a lucky position. And I urge you, with whatever authority and power you have, and I understand it's bigger than you, but you got a little piece of that pie. Take a stand, move it forward. The people who are behind this petition, it's evolved. They seem very open to evolving it further. I'm sure it needs to evolve further. We all need to learn. But if we don't push it forward, it won't evolve. So I urge you to take whatever action you can. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there no petition?
Hi, my name is Aaron King. I live at 40 Essex Street. I'm here as one of the named petitioners, just to, relay that, one reason that I became a part of this petition was that this topic is really the most important to my generation, and that's clear that, the kids in high school and college and young 20s, they are most interested in this issue politically. And so I just wanted to start creating this platform, help push this conversation forward in Cambridge, in this issue of development, talking about, getting new companies here and creating jobs, as well as balancing low-income housing. These are all very important issues, but I also just really hope that we also consider environmental impacts and efficiency. So I hope you guys continue to think about this as you look at developments that are coming to Cambridge. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is John Ratliff, R-A-T-L-I-F-F. I live at 218 Thorndike Street in East Cambridge. And the more I've listened to this discussion, the more the question has risen for me. If Cambridge doesn't do this, what city will? We're really at a place that's the envy of most other communities in terms of the number of people who want to move here and build and construct a competition for being here, for a lot of the advantages that we have that we're not going to be losing by taking this step. And no one would feel able to move if people in other cities are faced with the same question of who's going to lead, and they're at a much bigger disadvantage than we are, with a lot less demand, with a lot less possibility of making the change without paying some kind of a cost. Anytime we take important step forward in this kind of a world, it's always a fight against inertia. It's a fight against the way business is always done. It's a fight against people who think they have a stake in what they know because it's moving forward. And we've pioneered in a lot of those areas. Some have been mentioned tonight, the smoking and other areas like that. And always there's the opposition from people who are afraid of making the change. There's a lot more to fear out there than the risks of moving this petition forward. And unless some community takes a stand and begins to move against that much bigger threat, then none of us will have a very bright future ahead of us. And Cambridge should take that step and should take the lead. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is George Mokray, M-O-K-R-A-Y,
218 Franklin Street. There's a poem by Diane DePrima called Rant. And she says, the only war that matters is the war against the imagination. The only war that matters is the war against the imagination. The only war that matters is the war against the imagination. All other wars are subsumed in it. I published a weekly that looks at what's happening at MIT, Harvard, other colleges and universities in the local community about energy and other things. I go to a lot of these things, and I see many incredible ideas come forward, but I also see failures of imagination, failures of connection. Time after time after time after time. As the great American philosopher Pogo said, we are confronted by insurmountable opportunities. I think that net zero buildings, net zero emission buildings, possible. I know that some are being built, even 71-story buildings, 22-story buildings in China, in Vienna. These things are happening now. I know that builders in New England are building low and moderate income, net zero energy, positive energy buildings, all right? Affordably now, almost like cookie cutters. They've developed the technology, they know how to do it, not only here, but in Canada, and in more extreme environments. Net zero emissions to me is not only energy and carbon. We should be thinking about net zero emissions for everything. All right? As if you were camping, leave the site better than when you arrive. We need to be thinking that way, not only in terms of climate change, but in terms of all pollutants. And the imagination, the failure of imagination that I see here is that we're only settling for net zero. We should be thinking, as we've seen how the idea of net zero has focused our energies, we should be thinking about net positive. We should be thinking about becoming energy producers with our infrastructure here, of cleaning up the environment, of changing things. And we can do that. There is enough knowledge, there's enough experience, and there's only a lack of imagination. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your thoughts.
Anyone else wish to speak?
Good evening. My name is Lee Ferris, spelled L-E-E-F like Frank, A-R-R-I-S like Sam, and I live at 269 Norfolk Street in Cambridge. Thanks for giving us all an opportunity to share our thoughts. I speak in support of the net zero petition. I want Cambridge to be the first. I think that rather than hurting us, it will build our reputation long term. I think it will result in good buildings. And I think as a person who has put solar panels on my roof and seen my electric bill turn around, it's a great feeling. And I think that's a reasonable thing to ask of all of our large buildings. And I particularly would also like to, if that would also apply to universities and other organizations when they do large buildings. So I think that would be great for the whole city. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak?
Charles Dave, 23 Edmund Street. I hope you appreciate as much as I do the effort Mike Connolly put into revising the petition. I have to commend him. He diligently went through the staff memo and I think really applied their comments, something which you all know I never do. Many people recited the moral argument, which I think should carry the day. They recited the leadership argument, which I think should carry the day, but I was just going to give you the back of the envelope engineering argument. which is that from the city's own documents, is that 17% of the emissions in Cambridge are from transportation. And being the back of the envelope, we cut that in half. Let's say cars are doing about half of that. So 82% of the emissions are from buildings. Well, it's 10 times from the buildings. Then we look at cars. The lifetime of a car, when you go to replace it with a new technology car, about 10 years. Building is 100 years, another factor of 10. So the board has been very conscientious about reducing cars in Cambridge. You could reduce all the cars and it's not going to matter. It's 100 times more important to address the buildings. Now, this is just back of the envelope. I just want you to just think about that because the board puts so much effort into cars. And we just have to start focusing on what's really important. Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak? Okay, thank you. So, colleagues, I set out an approach an hour or so ago, and we've heard a lot of very people in that time. What should we do?
Well, I really appreciated the remarks and actually find myself in this wonderful position where I think there's broad sympathy, if not concurrence, from everybody sitting on this side of this thin table behind these microphones with everybody sitting over there. The extent to which any kind of antagonism was outlined, I don't feel it. I think that we as a community have come together in a really fantastic way here. So but there are a bunch of questions that need to be studied and need to be addressed before we can responsibly draft a piece of legislation, which is not our role after all. That happens at City Council. We simply advise on issues of city planning and issues of planning. So I have a number of questions which I would like to perhaps forward, pitch them into the public debate and into the formal legislative debate, which relate to, I guess, questions that we're supposed to be experts at, which is cities and city planning and physical space. So that's one suggestion. Is maybe as a board we could, throw some questions out into the debate that could be dealt with by the really thoughtful people that are here and could be pitched to the legislative bodies and committees that are working in front of them.
I concur with what my colleagues have said, and I probably concur with most everything that the public has said. Certainly, this is something that I am enormously concerned about, but it may be that I lack imagination and that I don't know the right way to go about it and what the right answers are or the right solutions are right now and how we balance the different concerns we have. One speaker talked about, higher density, greater population, having more mass transit. I think there are a lot of factors that have to be studied, and I don't feel competent at this point to say that this is the correct legislation that is going to solve all the problems or even some of the problems. And so I think I'm interested in what's going to come out of the debate that the mayor and the city council are having tomorrow, and the follows up and the task forces that are going to be constructed, because I think there are enormous questions that have to be answered, and either I lack the imagination or I certainly know I'm not scientifically competent to answer it myself, and to know that at this moment that this is the correct legislation that we should have. I look forward to the task force and the city council and the other governmental bodies moving forward as quickly as possible. And if it ends up being another zoning petition, that it comes back to us and that we will then have the sufficient information to try to determine whether, it is the right ordinance, whether the right zoning ordinance, or whether it should be some other form of legislation that the city adopts. But I think I and everybody else on this side probably agrees almost 100% with everything that's been said tonight.
Mr. Comments?
I hesitate to say anything. But perhaps a bit of a rejoinder, I guess. I think we've heard eloquently from a number of speakers that greenhouse gases present a problem, and we've heard the passionate plea that something needs to be done about it, and that we should do something about it. But I didn't hear a clear or coherent explanation as to how this particular petition would actually have a positive, measurable, significant impact in alleviating the problem. We agree, all of us, that there's an issue and a problem. But the difficult question that is presented to us today is whether this proposal will in fact be effective in addressing that problem. And frankly, again, as everybody has acknowledged, we're not scientists, I'm not a scientist, I don't understand all of the issues well enough to speak with tremendous confidence. But the goal of this petition is to mitigate the greenhouse gas problem. But my understanding from the wonderful memo that was prepared for us and from other readings is that the likelihood of any of the buildings, or any of the taller buildings anyway, the commercial buildings that we'd like to address, the likelihood that they would actually be net zero, in the sense that they will produce more energy than they consume, well, that in and of itself is very unlikely. So the key mechanism here to address the gap is that the operators of the building either purchase renewable energy on the grid or they purchase RECs. Well, my understanding from the memo again is that on the grid, renewable energy is not readily available to large commercial users. So then we're purchasing RECs, and I'm trying to figure out how RECs work. Well, it's not clear how they're going to be priced, who benefits from them. It's not clear how whether a building owner who purchases these RECs, how that actually benefits the residents of Cambridge, or how it actually addresses or alleviates or mitigates the problem that we're trying to address here. I mean, there are a lot of market factors in there. I mean, it's just not clear, and it really comes down, I think, to the availability of RECs, the cost of RECs, the availability of renewable energy on the grid, the cost of that energy, and ultimately, I guess I'm a bit confused. I'm a little bit skeptical, and I end up feeling that this ends up being largely, if not primarily, a symbolic statement, a symbolic political statement, a moral statement, and it's good to make such statements on important subjects such as this. But in this case, making this statement seems to be possibly imposing substantial costs on some people, very few people actually, but a substantial cost on those few people. It seems to be imposing administrative burdens on certain people, including this planning board and other city agencies. And, well, I cannot tell you what the consequences ultimately of this proposal would be. It seems clear that those consequences are to a large extent unknowable, unknown and unknowable at this point. So for all of these reasons, certainly at very least, I agree with you, Mr. Chair, that this should go to a committee that brings in not only greater scientific expertise, but economic expertise to do the analysis here, and to figure out what are we really accomplishing, or would we be accomplishing here. Now, if we had a bill that was talking about simply increasing the energy efficiency of buildings, by all means, if we want to require that buildings have geothermal heat pumps in the future, great, I can understand that. I mean, there are a lot of specific things that we can do in the city, or make amendments to the building code, or so forth. But frankly, so much of this proposal is tied into buying RECs or buying renewable energy on the grid, that's what really creates the total unknown and imponderable to me. So maybe it's a lack of imagination, but I think it's a lack of facts, and the lack of any of our ability to anticipate what those issues will mean down the road. So, long-winded way of supporting your suggestion that this go to a committee of people who are much more representative of the disciplines and expertises than we have, and that are necessary to really make some sense out of this entire topic.
This is not a debate. Mr. Chair, I want to mention it to my colleagues as well that there is so much good intentions in the room right now. And we have to remember that when this issue comes up, we are filled with good intentions despite some elements of negativity and doubt. But I think that's our strongest value. I think we need to really be able to work with that. I think that the idea that there needs to be a larger dialogue with deeper content depth in the participants is exactly where we need to go. However, I also think that this board can continue to play a role that encourages the outcomes of this inquiry to be as bold as we can be, always, and to have the kind of reach that we are used to having in Cambridge, which is to go beyond where people are, and to really say, we're going to go farther than that. We are really going to do that. We know we can do it. And the other thing is that I think that we need to continue to enunciate as a board in this process, not fear, but that we have a resolve to make this work out, that our resolve is very, very strong. And I think that that enunciation needs to recognize the strength of the comments from our younger folks tonight, that there is a great strength there that we can tap into and have work for us. So yes, I concur with my fellow board members that we need to keep on this issue, but it needs to be a larger dialogue.
So I wanted to agree with what my colleagues had to say, and I'm just curious as to when this task force or committee will be starting. Hiram, I don't know if you know that. And also, my hope is that the universities, the institutions, the business community, consultants, and the staff will all be involved, similarly to the rezoning petition that I participated in. I'm hoping that will happen. But do you know when this will be happening?
So, Pam, we received a council order on this topic just 2 weeks ago, and the council would like to wait for, had asked us to wait for this hearing, as well as the panel discussion that they have tomorrow and the roundtable discussion that they have, so that we have a better sense of what what's the direction that the planning board and the city council want us to go in, and we'll know a lot more about some of the technical considerations that come up. So that will help guide us in framing who's going to be on the petition. But definitely, the city council has guided us in getting that set of people that you mentioned. And in addition to that, also making sure that there is the technical expertise that other board members have alluded to make sure it's a really comprehensive picture guided by real knowledge.
Thank you.
I'm enjoying Yes. I'm going to follow up on so this is sort of my take on what you'd like to see. Geothermal energy is really a heat bank strategy. Basically, you take excess heat in the summer, put it into the earth, and then you draw it out in the winter. Now, there are other kinds of geothermal, but around here, that's basically the way it works. So it's advantageous because it doesn't put more heat into the atmosphere in the summer. It puts it underground. And then when you need it, you withdraw it. And it's not without its challenges, as the Unanimous shows, but that system has been functioning. It's no longer functioning as well as it was, but we'll figure out why. And it seems like that is something that, say, Harvard University is way ahead of the rest of the city. That's pretty standard because it makes so much economic sense and a lot of things to do. So why we would like people to do that? It may be difficult to do at the scale of very small buildings, but this particular petition is aimed at large buildings. It's expensive to drill wells. Thermal is apparently the most economical way to heat for buildings in Texas, where they've got a lot of drilling technology and maybe rock that's easier to drill, and I'm not sure about that. Another thing that occurs to me is that using roofs to collect solar energy is just like, again, another thing that makes tremendous sense. And it's what we can do in the city on some roofs. I've looked at the study for my house, and there's a patch about 14 square that I can put a solar collector on because I'm in the shadow of the Longfellow School. But so it makes me, but the Longfellow School gets all of its sunlight. And yes, maybe a collector would stick up and illuminate my 4-foot square patch. But the old climate protection plan, which I was told was defunct this week, talked about an urban forest strategy. I don't think that idea is defunct. Grow trees, sequester carbon on the short term. They provide shade. They convert, change the microclimate. And we can do more on that. And, there's an opportunity, I think, and I think that the common petition says we can. We've got an opportunity with these very expensive biotech buildings to leverage significant improvements in performance. Because the buildings cost hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars a square foot to build. A lot of these changes significant to the overall cost. The biggest opportunity is really in the city is the existing housing stock that was built in my house 130 odd years ago and has been upgraded a few times. Like, for example, when they put in heat, that would have been better, I guess, before. They had coal stoves as the heating in houses built. But there's a, you try to get a sewer permit in lots of parts of the Commonwealth. Of a certain size, you have to do I&I. And I&I stands, I believe, for infiltration and inflow. And what it says is, if you're going to put more wastewater into the system, you've got to get rid of extraneous water that's leaking into the system that's equal to twice what you're doing. So it might be better to think about, instead of purchasing renewable energy credits, saying to Pfizer or whatever, well, gee, you're not doing as well as you should, so fix up 100 houses. And that will produce effect here. And, you know, what does that mean? Fix up 100 houses in the I&I program. You actually go into private and public property, and you, at the developer's expense, do that. Maybe in this kind of program, it's more like a technical assistance program. It's a system that gets created. Now, those are sort of some of my ideas that I would forward to the task force. Will that accomplish the goals? Just those 4 ideas? I'd rather doubt it. Should they be part of the system? Well, they should be. Tom, do you want to go back to your list now?
Yeah, there's been a lot of great ideas. Steve's got some, and we've articulated some wonderful ideas. My questions, I think, are some of the obvious ones. You know, what's the present value of the initiative? What's the payback time? And that can be measured by within some other context. But if we say, okay, you've got to make the most efficient envelope you possibly can, that might have a real deleterious effect on the built environment. For instance, when buildings start to rotate themselves with advantageous solar orientation, which might be contrary to our street grid, contrary to our historic pattern in our neighborhoods. So kind of law of unintended consequences that you might end up with, not a great urban form for buildings that were emphasizing energy efficiency and net zero over some of the other qualities that we hold really dear here in Cambridge. So that's a question I might have about that. Your point about the urban forest also led me to a question about, well, okay, so then what are your rights to sunlight across your property? If you have to generate energy to reach your net zero, are you going to therefore ask the city to remove street trees so that you would have sunlight so you could take advantage of solar gain? Maybe an absurd question, but it's the kind of question that needs to be addressed and thought through, maybe not only in the context of the actual language of the Connolly petition, but through the legislative processes. Let's see. Yeah, so I have Pebble Drive too. So I think we should be leaders, absolutely, on this issue, and I think we can come up with some pretty amazing ideas and a pretty intricate way in which to deal with these issues. I will say, Steve's question about whether zoning is the right forum. Zoning is a blunt instrument. Now dealing with it in a great deal of detail for over 20 years here in the city, it describes a pretty gross environment. I mean, it's very hard to do things precisely in it, and maybe it is another type of ordinance or law or regulation that actually should be governing this rather than zoning.
I think that the thing that strikes me most about this ordinance is how it doesn't, or I don't see how it interacts with existing regulation through, for instance, the stretch energy code. And I think that those kinds of interactions really need to be further fleshed out, and those tools employed alongside with and what has been laid out here. I think there's some amount of this that is probably best done through the state building code, and which we may be leaders in advocating for and promoting, just as we did with stretch energy, but that really adoption on a much wider scale than just the city is probably appropriate. There is some really innovative thinking here about what to do to get beyond that. And I applaud that innovation. And just because I'm not there on how it works and how it would interact with other city departments and how we as a board would assess whether or not criteria had been adequately made. I mean, in some respects, going from a binary system of you either maximized it or you didn't to a you strove to maximize your energy efficiency or you didn't, puts a lot more discretion on the planning board and leaves it a lot more open to what do we think is enough. I think we need a lot more guidance on that. It is not clear to me what's enough. I don't have the technical expertise of building systems to know what's enough. And while I think we can certainly rely a lot on city staff for that input, I don't know whether or not that ongoing capacity for continually updating and evaluating those things are there yet. And I think the city council, in considering how we build the capacity as a city to evaluate that, needs to be discussed. I think that, if we're going to actually make that kind of discretionary evaluation, we do need to have the either in-house expertise or an on-call engineer or someone who can advise us on it, because I personally don't feel equipped to make that kind of discretionary judgment on where we go, which is why I gravitate to the stretch energy code, because a building inspector anywhere in the state can tell me, did you meet it or did you not? And when we get into more discretionary aspects, just like we did with traffic, and it was an excellent point that folks brought up, that's a place where the planning board has long relied on the expert advice and assistance of traffic engineers, initially with an on-call engineer who provided analysis for us, and as over time, the city has built that in-house expertise. Those are the kinds of things that we need to be considering as we look to do this, and essentially give a lay board the discretion to evaluate a very technical subject.
So I'm very pleased you brought up the traffic analogy, because I think that's right on. I was speaking with Aaron earlier about this, and it's like now when there's a traffic question, we have the in-house people who are smart. We have experience, some of which is experience that you gathered and did in the whole section of that management, and that we really need to be that smart about all the aspects that lead to positions here, but all the aspects of energy management relating to climate change and the dire consequences for the city. So
had one other question that must have come up in the deliberations already, which is an anathema probably to many people here, the notion of incrementalism. Do you put this in over time? I know that every major architectural firm, many of which have appeared before this board, have signed on to something called the 2030 challenge, which is a promise to make all of their buildings net zero by 2030. They're supposed to be 60% on the way already. I wonder if that is a model that we might consider. In environmentalism, sometimes you do have to pump down the road because the technology doesn't exist fully, or the will doesn't exist fully at the moment. 2030 turns out it's not that far away. There is absolute urgency about the issue, but maybe that's a model in these huge problems that you deal with incrementally.
It reminds us that we took a tiny step in the building on Mass Avenue where we looked at the glass curtain wall and said, which faces north, and said, no. Now their response wasn't dramatic, but it went from 100% glass to about 80% glass. And I don't know what's behind the spandrel panels. It may well be your insulation in the spandrel portions. It certainly looks so. So are we ready now to ask the staff to make a recommendation, write up a recommendation based on our discussion? The gist of which is we believe the task force process is needed to address these matters. We don't know if there are interim measures that could be taken while that task force is doing the work that might be either administrative or regulatory. We can change the information we ask people to think about when they come before us. Often that hasn't started progressing. And then we've had responded to the imagination challenge by, I think, demonstrating, as Professor Dan said, that we're really not very good at this. And I thought that was one of the most accurate pieces of characterizations of the planning board. Like, yes, we are not, climate scientists or energy experts. So that would be the substance of the motion, to not recommend adoption as submitted, to recommend that task force process be engaged to get something that can be adopted, and that we can really our suggestions and comments.
I concur with that, and all I would suggest as part of our recommendation is that the task force and the city council or whatever entity is taking it up proceed with all the speed as quickly as they can.
I think another important thing arises through the challenge, some of the voices today, to act. You preface that by saying that we would advise that an ordinance be drafted that supports and focuses on this crisis of the pollutants coming out of buildings and be it net zero. I don't know what the solution is, but we're in favor of that, and we support legislation being drawn up in whatever form is appropriate to address this issue within our city limits.
So would you prepare such a recommendation? Thank you. Thank you all for coming and helping to raise our level of understanding of this issue. I don't think